Hi, I'm Alex Pavljuk. This week on Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me, I'm going to be joined again by Melissa Casale, the digital marketing manager here at the Montclair Art Museum. A few weeks back, we had recorded an episode together focused on the $6.2 million banana that sold at auction in November of 2024. And in the closing minutes of that episode, Melissa and I talked about how we'd both be visiting Washington, D.C. in the coming weeks. As of this point, those trips have happened, and our journeys, although separate and uniquely different in their own ways, correlated on one singular facet. That would be that we'd be seeking out art. For Melissa, it would be the famed Impression Sunrise by Claude Monet on loan for, I think, the first time in the United States. And for myself, there were two driving reasons. The first was just to visit DC for the first time. I've never been before. And more importantly, in my opinion, was to see Ginevra da Vinci, the famed and only finished painting by Leonardo da Vinci that resides in the United States. Maybe it was in part because of the recent Ken Burns documentary, or, also I think more prominently because I just had a Leonardo da Vinci fixation when I was in middle school that still kind of lingers to this day for me. Anyway, obviously, Melissa and I don't aim to bore our listeners with our Washington, D.C. escapades in full. However, my job sometimes feels never ceasing, as I am often thinking about video, podcast, or social media ideas like late into the evening or weekends after work has long been over. And, this trip was no different. As I traveled through the city with my lifelong childhood friend that traveled with me, fortunately, I came to the realization that we were experiencing not just DC, but all of the museums that we were exploring for the first time. Never had I stepped foot into any of these places or seen any of these works of art across these different institutions. We ended up going to three. We went to the National Gallery, we went to the National Portrait Gallery, we went to, I guess more than three, but, obviously the Portrait Gallery and the Smithsonian's American Art Museum is in the same building, so 2-for-1 deal, I guess, there. And then the Archives and the American Art Museum. So a few different institutions. But anyway, in many ways, I was doing the thing that on this show we aim to push people to experience, and that's the exploration and appreciation of new art and getting out of their comfort zone and seeing the world and all of the wonderfully creative things within it. It was a great joy and really helped me, I think, better understand the mission of this podcast because I was experiencing it in person myself there, just a week ago. So this entire trip did raise a question for me. The question which we raised this episode and hopefully aim to answer, I'd hope so because I experienced it, is how does someone explore a new museum for the first time? So without further ado, Melissa Casale will be joining us. Melissa.
Alex.
It's that time of the week again.
It is. You drag me into a podcast episode.
Stop. Come on.
No, I enjoy it.
This one was on the books. We knew this one was coming.
Yeah.
We both took a trip.
We did take a trip.
How was your trip? I almost said vacation. It really wasn't a vacation.
No, it was a very quick
Yeah,
trip.
but how was your jaunt down to Washington, D.C.?
It was great. I love that city so much. What about you? How was your little jaunt down to DC?
You know what? There's one glaring thing that just is really sticks out in my mind. Amtrak rules.
Oh yeah,
Amtrak
it's great.
is the best.
It is great.
I never want to take an NJ Transit train again. I was on an NJ Transit train a day after. I got stuck in the tunnel. It was packed. There were no chargers. I couldn't get a coffee. Miserable. I'm gonna, every time because I go home, I used to always, if I did take the train home, I would have to go to NJ Transit to Hamilton. Screw that. I'm taking an Amtrak to Trenton, and I don't care if it costs more. I'm living in, it's like a plane on rails. I love it. Okay. Sorry.
It's okay. That was a big part of the journey. It was
3 hours. 3.5 hours. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Big Amtrak guy now.
Yeah. Good.
But alas, we talked about it in our last episode, but there was a very specific reason why the two of us were going to DC. But I guess for the sake of conversation and context, Melissa? Why? What did you go to DC for?
The main reason I went to DC is I wanted to go see an exhibition currently on view in the National Gallery of Art. The exhibition is Paris, 1874, the Impressionist movement.
Mm.
I'm a big fan of Impressionism. It's one of my favorite art movements. I studied quite a few of the works that were actually on view while I was in grad school. And kind of the main work on view was Impression Sunrise by Monet, which is largely considered the first Impressionist work of art. It's where the name Impressionism comes from. And I saw on the National Gallery of Art's Instagram page that they were hanging it and that this was going to be the first time it was ever on view in the United States. It hasn't been outside of France, I don't believe. So I was like, oh my God, I have to, it's so close. I have to go and see and stare at it and look at all the other artwork. So it was that exhibition that really drove me to take this day trip down.
Yeah. Similarly, I mean, became a part of the thing that I did too.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately I was in DC for a little bit of a different reason. I talk about this in the cold open, but A, I'd never been to DC before, so this was an opportunity to experience that. And then B, I am a huge Leonardo da Vinci fan. I have been since middle school. Shout out Assassin's Creed 2. That's the reason why. But yeah, I had my middle school fixation has waned but never left, and the Ken Burns documentary really reinforced that. Yeah. And I was like, I gotta get down there. Mm-hmm. So I went to go see the only Leonardo da Vinci work in the United States, which was also at the National Gallery. So that was essentially what led me to DC. But I would like to say before we kind of jump into the rest of this, because essentially the key question of this episode is, how does someone explore a new museum for the first time? Because for me, unlike you, but for me, you went to a new museum.
I
did
you? Go to a new museum after I went to the National
We'll talk about
Gallery.
that in a little bit.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I had a great experience at this new museum I went to. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, I had never been to the National Gallery. I had never been to the National Portrait Gallery. I didn't realize that the Portrait Gallery and the American Art Museum were attached as like one kind of conjoined thing. So that was really exciting. Yeah, and I have a lot of thoughts and opinions and takes on it's been a long time since I've been to a new museum, and so I think I was putting my own advice to the test. But before any of that, I just want to say DC is really cool. It's a really cool city, and I definitely didn't see probably the DC that you experienced and grew up in. Not grew up in, but like the DC
spent some formative years in.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time near like the National Mall and stuff, and we were in and out of a lot of the museums. Obviously, food's not great. I'll say that. Is there good food in DC? We really struggled. We did really struggle.
There is. I don't know where you ended up going.
We went to I don't know. We couldn't it's not that there was like a ton of. I mean, there was a Carmine, so there are some tourist trap places, but like we tried. It just ended up being bar food every single time, which is great. Yeah. But like I can only eat bar food so many times. Mm-hmm. I want to first kind of talk about overall notes before we get into like the specifics of like each museum that we went to.
Okay.
But the first thing that I think like when it comes to like the idea of like, okay, you're going to a new museum, what should I keep in mind? I tried to go in really, really like open-minded and open to any experience and with no preconceived notion of what I was going to experience, because I had no basis for all of these museums. And so I would say the first mistake I made, which I think you noted my hubris in the previous episode we recorded together.
Last time we talked.
I wanted to do too much. And I think the reality is you need to pick 2 or 3 places that you really want to see, and you do not rush them. We essentially did that, but I think we went in realizing, we're not going to hit air and space. We're not going to get to, this place. We're not going to get to that place. So we had to settle, and
Yeah, you had to trim the list down. Yeah, because when you were listing all those out, it's a lot to do, but also especially those like Smithsonian museums that are huge and there's a lot of different things in to like just the amount of time to even just walk through everything would take up so much of your day, even if you weren't paying attention as closely as I feel like someone like you would.
Oh yeah, and like I'll say it, like I really did I will say in the portrait gallery and in the, I'm just going to say the portrait gallery, but when I say the portrait gallery, I mean the American Art Museum.
Yeah,
it's one building. I'm just going to say the portrait gallery from now forward for the sake of clarity and ease. But in that was our first museum we went to. We did that day one. We were only there for 2 days. We were there for like 48 hours. Not that I got overwhelmed, but I definitely like got fatigued. We were there maybe 3 hours.
Yeah, museum fatigue is real.
You know, we went through, especially the portrait side of things, on, you know, it's like I walked in and the first painting that floored me, and there was a lot in the portrait gallery that really did floor me. I think that was the best experience I had out of the trip. That was the most engulfed I felt, was the portrait of Benjamin Franklin that you kind of, I think, at least for me, like growing up near Philly, you see a lot of Benjamin Franklin. I mean, he's like the pseudo mascot for like the 76ers, which is like my favorite NBA team. Okay. So like I grew up in a very pro Benjamin Franklin region.
Okay.
And so like seeing like what is the most famous portrait of Ben was like a huge deal for me. But yeah, I found, me and my friend Joe, we found ourselves really entranced in that first floor, and then we went, oh my god, wait, we still have 3 more floors.
Yeah, you still got a ways to go.
Yeah. But anyway, the second kind of overall note that I noticed, and this kind of came in the National Gallery, follow the signs. It helps. It really does, especially in those museums. Like if it's pointing you in a certain direction, a lot of the times I'd be like, I feel like we're going into this labyrinth that never ends. How do I get out? How am I going to find the next thing? Trust the process. Just like keep following it. It's going to funnel you where it wants you to go.
They know what they're doing. They've been around the block. They know kind of how to lead people who need and want to be leaded.
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily the case in every institution. I know, like, I don't know if the Met, certainly you can get quite lost in. I don't think the Met is as tidy as the National Gallery was, but you could feel like you're getting like boxed in.
It has a similar feel where there's these little alcoves or offshoots from various rooms, and you go in one room and then you're like, wait, do I turn around? Do I keep going in this circle I've made of myself? Like, will I end up back where I started if I go this way? So
yeah, but I think that bleeds into then the last overall note before we get into like specifics. Get lost. Like, just like, like me and you, because we'll get to it, but we did run into each other at one point.
Yes.
And the second time we ran into each other at the National Gallery, after we had met up to see the show that you came to see, I was looking for Joe and I couldn't find him, and I was not like, I was looking at the art, but I definitely wasn't enjoying it the way I should have been. And then I looked to my left and there was just a bunch of Van Goghs in front of me, and I was like, whoa, I'm gonna stop right here. And then you poked me and were like, what are you doing here?
I was like, because you had texted me being like, because we lost each other, and you're like, I left, and I was like, okay, cool, bye. And I actually went looking for the Van Goghs, because I was like, I was getting ready to leave, and I was in my head, I said, I have to go visit Van Gogh. Like, that's how I phrased it. I gotta go see it, because I knew he had those paintings there. So I went, and then you were just standing there.
Yeah, I was kind of lost in it a little bit. But yeah, those are my notes. Don't do too much, follow the signs, and get lost. Those are the big key points that I had noticed.
Succinct, yes.
Yeah, that I noticed from visiting a new museum. But getting into the specifics, I want to start with the National Portrait Gallery. When was the last time you were there? Probably grad school?
It was, March 2022. it was when I was down there with my friends. They wanted to go see it, and I was like, okay, great. So we went.
What is your favorite part of that museum? Because I think I have my answer, but I'm curious what you like about it. Or do you have a favorite work, potentially? Or
I do have a favorite work. I don't know the name, but as soon as I say it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's that neon map.
Oh, yes. I took a photo of it.
Yeah.
It's essentially, it's a neon map of the continental United States, and Alaska and Hawaii are off to the side. But the focal point is the upper 48.
It's made of like TV screens and LED lights that those outline each state, and then each state has its own screen that's like playing footage.
Something like a lot of it was like
that's like related to that state. And there's a spot that if you stand on a spot, there's a video camera where it then shows you in DC, like on the map, like it's constantly running. So it's like a live feed of DC.
Yeah.
Which I just think it's very cool.
Yeah.
And it's a random thing that like the first time I was there, I didn't know that was a thing. And I found myself in this room that largely has contemporary artwork.
Absolutely.
And there was this map, and I just thought it was so cool.
Yeah. In that same room, there was some Mickalene Thomas works, which were really, really cool to see, especially knowing that, we have her here at MAM.
Yeah.
But those were really, really fun to check out and experience. For me in the portrait gallery, I think the thing that I learned, and I guess this is essentially the case for most museums, but I found myself really trying to experience different works as they came. And I'm very like, I have a lot of emotions. I can get very overwhelmed very quickly in like an emotional way. And especially being that this was my first time in this place and I didn't know necessarily what I was bound to see. I found myself getting very worked up over certain things. And this is all before I even saw the Leonardo da Vinci work.
That's fine. I got emotional when I was in the National Gallery.
Yeah.
So.
But it was like the first one that was Ben Franklin that I really like felt something. And then we got to the end of that first hallway in the portrait gallery, and I kind of spotted it in the distance, but I was like, is that who it is? Because I'm also, I mean, this, we both are. We're both history nerds.
Yeah.
We both love history. And one of my favorite figures in American history is John Brown. And at the end of the hallway was this like almost biblical depiction of John Brown. You know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's almost comical because it's so like over the top, but it's like, it really just like dug in at me.
Yeah.
And I like teared up looking at it. It was just like, it was so good. It was so good. And I think Joe had a very similar, my childhood friend that was with me, I think had a very similar reaction to it. It was like one of the few paintings that he like took a photo of. But yeah, that was so good. The other thing that was really nice about the Portrait Gallery / American Art Museum was, it was like kind of like MAM. It was round, much bigger, albeit, but it was rectangular in that way, which made it quite easy to navigate. You kind of bled in and out though, which was a little bit difficult to follow, and I kind of struggled with. Is sometimes your orientation got a little off, and you would think you're in the portrait gallery, and then you'd make a right, and then all of a sudden
you're in the American
you're
Art
looking
Museum.
at like a John Singer Sargent, and it's like, oh, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways that was kind of nice in its own right. It kind of kept giving you fresh lenses and new things to look at. But yeah, essentially that was the bulk of my experience with the National Portrait Gallery was that. Talk to me about the other museum that you went to. I am curious about this because I didn't go to this institution.
I went to the National Museum of Women in the Arts.
And this was your new museum of the trip.
This is my new museum. I had never been there. This is not a Smithsonian museum. So it's not on the mall. It's a little, like you have to walk 10 minutes up the street. But yeah, so I had in my head like, if I what else can I do in a day while I'm there? Because I was there for a grand total of like 7 hours. So I was like, well, I'm going to go to the National Gallery of Art. I'll get something to eat. And then what can I do for the rest of the afternoon? And the National Museum of Women in the Arts is, again, a place I've never been. And the only things I know about it is from social media. I follow them on Instagram. So that's it. So it's just one of those places where I would like to go if I ever got the chance and I happen to get the chance. And I'm so glad I went.
Yeah.
It was so great. And it was kind of similar where I didn't really know anything. I knew some things just from my, like, I didn't really go researching, but just from like seeing things on social media, and I have their newsletter and things, but that's it. So I knew like they have a Frida Kahlo. I know a little bit about their permanent collection, a little bit about their mission, but
do you think it's important to know a little bit about the institution that you're going to visit for a first time, or do you think going in nearly blind is a good route in its own right?
I think nearly blind is a totally fine route to take. Yeah, I don't know if I knew too much, I would have maybe taken the same route I took, which I shudder to think if I didn't see some of the things I saw. So I went in, and visitor services told me to start from the top and work my way down.
Okay.
So it's like you come in, it's the main floor, there's a mezzanine, and then there's like 3 other floors of artwork. So I went to the very top floor, and that's where they had like their studios and some learning center stuff.
Cool.
And it was their smaller gallery where they had like a contemporary photography show happening, which was interesting. And then I went down to the next floor, which is where their permanent collection is. Yeah. I spent a lot of time on this floor, and it was, I kind of had the same experience as you did, where you saw Micheline Thomas, where like I kept seeing names from Pam's collection that I recognized. Like they have an Alice Neal, they have a Jane Quick-to-Say Smith, Faith Ringgold. But then I also saw people I didn't know, and it's not just because I know their name that I thought they were interesting, but I was like, oh my god, ma'am. Like I always am constantly thinking about ma'am.
No, yeah, that absolutely. And I want to talk about that a little bit more with later, but I definitely, like, I remember walking through the National Gallery, the Portrait Gallery, or American Art Museum, wherever, and it's like, oh, that's a Hassam. Oh, that's a Casale, and it's like, it was very exciting where it's like checking those boxes of like, not only do I know that artist, but I've gotten to get really close to some works and not set off an alarm, which Joe may have in the Rembrandt part of the National Gallery.
Yeah, but they have it set up. They recently did like renovations in the museum, so it's all fairly new or new-ish. But they have it like thematically set up as opposed to like time wise, which I like. I like when we can make these connections between contemporary art and older art or historical art. But yeah, it was great. I loved looking at their collection, and I actually had a very similar moment where I was walking through and I looked, and in the doorway I could see this giant sculpture. That it was a horse, but it looked to be made out of like sticks and twigs, so it was almost like the bones of a horse.
Okay, interesting.
I'm going to show you a picture, which other people won't be able to see, but I just want Alex to appreciate
That's okay.
What I'm, But I was like, oh my god, like I stopped and I stared at it, and I took a picture of it from the doorway, and then I went into this room where there were these like larger than life sculptures and paintings, and I was like,
whoa.
So yeah, I have a ton more, but it's so I went over to the wall label, and it's by an artist called Deborah Butterfield, and it's called Big Horn. And this was an artist who she like worked with horses. She was an equestrian rider, so she knew about their anatomy and all these different things. So And it turns out so I thought it was legit made out of like logs and stuff, but it turns out it's cast bronze.
What?
So she like, I guess, made casts.
Oh my God.
To make it look like wood.
That's insane.
Yeah. And it's like, it's life size. It's like the size of and there was no like barriers on the floor.
So you could just get.
So I was getting up in there. I was being respectful, but I was taking like pictures of the face and everything. It was just so cool. And that's what drew me into that room. And then I saw other things in that room that were just as beautiful and crazy. And now I'm like obsessed with this artist, which I feel like happens.
The way that you talked about, which I think is a good pivot into the National Gallery. But the way that you were talking about getting all up in there with the horse and like that is how I felt when we finally got to Ginevra da Benci. Like, it's behind glass, like it's protected.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, understandably so.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But when I saw the Mona Lisa, you're just so set back. Like it's I was front and center, like got up close, but it's not the same.
The rope barrier is like at least 5 feet from the actual art.
Yeah. Whereas with this, you could like, it felt like my nose was like nearly pressed against it, and like the guards weren't stopping me. They were like, "Yeah, you're good. You're not gonna hurt it. Go, have fun."
Yeah.
And that was so special, like being able to have that level of intimacy with the art, even if it's behind glass. It's still special.
You can still see more than you could ever hope to see.
Yeah.
And that again happened to me in the Women's Art Museum, where after I went through the permanent collection, I was like, that was great. That was like the best part of this museum. I had one more floor and I was like, oh, okay, fine. I go down and it's this permanent. No, it's not permanent. Sorry, my mistake. It's this temporary exhibition they have for this artist called Sutra Matai is her name. I never heard of her before. I kind of saw that they were touting this show through newsletters and things, and I was like, oh, whatever, I don't care, whatever. And this is just walk through really quick. I think I spent the most time in this room. I'm now, again, I found a couple of obsessions during this trip, but she does like these large like fiber arts installation pieces, and she has sculptures and weavings and embroidery, and it's crazy. And while I was walking through, it kind of reminded me of Vanessa German, in the sense that Vanessa German's work had so many things in them, and this was kind of similar, where there were so many threads to make things up, and there was so much like embellishment on, like there was just so much where you could stare at one thing and just kind of get lost in it, like with all these like beads and fabric and everything. And sorry, I'm showing Alex again more things. No, that's okay. But I started reading about her, and like she constructed these like life-size sculptures of people. And her family was originally from India.
Oh my God, look at that. And
then they immigrated to the Caribbean, where she was born. So she has all this like Indo-Caribbean like ancestry and tradition. So like she uses saris to make her weavings, and she uses all this special embellishments, and it was so cool to look at and so impressive. So again, that was the thing where I was surprised by this and how much I liked it and how much I enjoyed looking at it. And I was like, okay, I gotta take a lot of pictures in here, and maybe I'll buy the book in the shop, which I ended up doing. But I was like, I was gonna skip this. I wasn't even gonna come down here. But thankfully I did.
You got a little lost.
I got a little lost, and I found something that I wasn't expecting to find, and so it was kind of a nice way to cap off my journey, where I started with, the impressionism show in that world, and then I ended up down in the last floor of the National Women in the Arts Museum with Sutra and her work, and I was just as engrossed in both of them. Yeah.
Moving now to like the last institution, which I mean we've talked, obviously
we
like,
weaved in and out.
Weaved in all of these, but spending a little bit of time where we finally, although we picked the same weekend, we were not intentionally trying to see each other.
No, we didn't make any plans to see each other. We were both doing our own thing. I think you had like jokingly said, "Oh, like I'll see you on the train back," because we were on the same train back. But I was like, probably not, but okay.
Yeah.
Like
we did run into each other.
Yeah, and like DC is a big city, and the National Gallery, which we both had plans to see at some point, is a big museum.
Yeah.
So the fact that I was in there for like 5 minutes. That's
and
when
I had
you
been in there for
by.
an hour by that point. Yeah, essentially what happened was, and this kind of goes into, again, this was now at the time it was the second museum that I was going into. Again, had never been there before. You had spent a lot of time in there during your grad school years, but this was totally new for me. So we ended up turning and going, I believe, right towards the, all of the classics, essentially.
Yeah, you were in the older wing where like the Renaissance stuff is, and like the 16 and 1700 Dutch stuff is, whereas I was on the completely opposite end of the museum. I went in there specifically for that one exhibition. I walked right to it. Like I knew exactly where I was going. Yeah. You kind of wanted to wander a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think this goes to and this is kind of my philosophy no matter where I go, and I definitely use this tool at museums I've been to before. I use this tool obviously now in these new institutions that I went to, but I always try to go into a museum, and I think this works regardless of where it is or what it is or whatever, with a goal in mind. Something I want to see, a place that I want to go to, something I want to experience.
Yeah.
And in this instance, it was kind of the nucleus of the entire trip, is I needed to see the Leonardo da Vinci work. But because of that unwavering need, I understood that there would be big names aside from obviously the biggest fish of them all. But I didn't take the time to like go and see like, oh, like what's going on and like what do they have in their permanent
like who's in this room or who's over
like
here,
I didn't do any of that research. And so we saw the sign that says go this way for Da Vinci. And we were like, okay. So we followed that, and I like we keep saying, I like to get a little lost. And I like it to be like I want to be shocked, and I want to be surprised, and I want to be left like kind of like waiting for something.
Yeah.
And we kind of were like, okay, we don't know, somewhere in this wing is this painting. We're going to find it, but we're not going to rush. And so we just took the first left, which happened to be a room full of Rembrandts. Yeah. Which later we found out was actually, if you were to follow the signs, the last room you were supposed to be in. So we technically did it backwards. But again, who cares?
Yeah, who cares?
And so it's like the immediate thing is, oh, we're just surrounded by a dozen, if not more.
You're not going to skip them. You're not going to walk back out.
We kind of employed the same protocol as the portrait gallery, which was we're going to look at everything.
Yeah.
And it was tiring. And by the time you get deep into like the Dutch and paintings, and you start getting into like the Dutch fantastical works where they're depictions of like Greek myths and
all the history paintings.
It's like it's very fantastical. I was kind of getting checked out, but I will say the the oceanscapes and the boats and whatnot, all of that was very fantastic. There's a great I'll show you it later. There's a great photo, or like I keep saying photo, it's not a photo, it's a painting. But there's this great painting. It was small and tiny. It was like the first offshoot of the Rembrandt room, where it was just this little hermit guy. And I loved it. I was like, that's great. That guy's awesome. Yeah. Little freaky dude. And so like we were just like stumbling around there, and I eventually popped back out of like I was getting a little, because at this point I didn't know that it was all kind of connected, and like you're gonna get a little lost, and it's a bit of a maze, but at the end of the day you're gonna pop out where it wants you to pop out. And so I was kind of treating it like the Met, where I'm like, this is getting deep, and I don't want to lose.
You're gonna get lost.
Like,
you're not gonna be able to find your way back
corridor,
out.
yada yada yada. And so I kind of drifted back, and there she was.
Yeah.
I could see her across the corridor through like 2 different door frames.
Yep.
Just empty rooms staring at me.
Yeah, they frame her nicely.
And I was just like, all right, we gotta go. We gotta get there. It is. And it was like my heart fluttered. I walked in there. No one was in the room. It felt almost religious in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I stared at it similar to when because like, you know, the Mona Lisa is its own beast.
Yeah.
But like, this is, anytime you encounter a Da Vinci, it's a very special and unique experience. I think just because of the mythos around the man.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, and for me, who's put so much stock in, and you know, I read the ginormous biography of him when I was in 7th grade. Like,
wow.
I love Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah.
And getting to just be nearly nose pressed against the glass, like noticing things. Like, I've seen this work on paper a million times, but to like to be able to like see the finite details of like, I never knew that like under her dress, like you can see like there's the blue ribboning that like is, you know, cinching up the red dress that she's wearing, but beneath that is like a silk shirt, like undershirt that like is very delicate. Like, I could never notice that until I was like face to face with it. And just like, I spent probably 15 or 20 minutes just staring in silence, like afar, up close, one side, the other side, different angles. And I think I spent probably 30 minutes in total in that room, just like with the painting. Because that's the whole reason I went to DC, was to see this painting. So like, I'm going to spend the most time there. And it was very important to me. And I thought it was also hilarious that because it's the only Da Vinci, you know, finished Da Vinci work in the United States, they also treat the back of the painting as its own painting. Yeah. Because there is, you know, he did paint on the back of the canvas, but it is funny that they do treat it as 2 separate works.
So it's not hanging on a wall.
Yeah.
It's like it's basically on a pedestal. Yeah. And it has glass around the whole thing, but it's not in a box or anything. Yeah. But because it's in glass, you can also see the back where he's like written or painted on the back. So it's like the back is just as interesting as the front. So that was great. Yeah. And then we bumped into each other. Yeah. I had walked straight to the National Gallery, and because this exhibition is so popular, they have to you queue up for it. You have to line up for it so they can control how many people are in the gallery at one time. So I hopped right online. I'm like, I'm not doing anything else today. I don't really care how long I have to stand here. And I was on this line for, no joke, maybe 2 to 5 minutes. And suddenly you walk by me. Well, so we walked into the space, and Joe is like, I don't really want to. He's like, I didn't come here to see those works. I really only know Monet out of this collection. Mm-hmm. I'm sure, like, you know, obviously, like he knew Degas too and stuff, and would appreciate all of the works. He certainly did when we got in there. But he was like, all of these names are also around here. He's like, I don't need to see these specific works. Yeah. I'm good not waiting in line. If you want to wait in line, all good. He's like, but I'm gonna go drift off. And I said, okay, let me go. I'm gonna go check to see how long this is, because at the time, I saw the poll and it said 51 minutes. And I was like, that's like, I don't know if I got an hour. Like, we're on finite time. You know, we have other museums we want to see today. I don't know if I can commit to wasting, and not that I'm wasting it, but throwing away. Like, is it worth it? Yeah. And so I was like, let me just go see the end of the line. And I walked maybe like 20 feet. And then all of a sudden you're like, Alex. I was just like, oh, hey, what's up? And so I jumped in line with you. I called Joe over, and we waited maybe 30 minutes. Yeah. And it was worth it. It was worth every minute. We hung out in line, and then we got in. Yeah. And it was something else. It was special. We kind of split off from each other fairly quickly, but that's fine. I mean, you definitely, because that was what you came to see. So I was like, I'm going to take my time. Yes. I haven't seen anything else. I don't have museum fatigue yet. And I had a very similar experience with Impression Sunrise that you did with the Da Vinci, where I was like, oh my God, I've seen this so many times. It hung on your wall. I had a print of it in my dorm room, and it's just so different. I remember because it's right in the doorway, so while you're in line, you can kind of see it while you're queuing up. And I was like, oh, okay. Oh, it looks this way and it looks that way. And then I'm like, but then when I was standing right in front of it, I was like, oh no, it looks totally different than how I perceived it before, where it, for lack of a better word, it looks flat when you're far back from it, or when you're viewing it on a screen or a print of it. It can't be three-dimensional. It has to be flat. And then I'm standing in front of it and I'm like, no, I see the brush strokes and there's all these little kind of waves of paint. And I remember thinking, it's shiny. There's like a gloss on it. And I think it was a mixture of the paint and this gloss and the way the light was hitting it, and it like shimmered. And I was like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. I love it so much. And I wish I stayed there a little bit longer. I kind of felt like I couldn't stand there for half an hour because
it felt like you were like delaying
it
people,
feels like I was monopolizing people's time who wanted to see it, and I didn't want to do that. But I was just like, I did stand there for a little bit, and I kind of took my time, and and I was just like, and yeah, and so I saw the thing I wanted to see first and foremost, which was great. And then it's kind of like, okay, now what? but there was much more to see, and it was
really great to see. And this is even beyond the show, because it was definitely put in the right area. Like, it wasn't like sometimes with these shows they just need the space, so they'll put them kind of in a an abstract location that isn't really connected. But it felt like all of the galleries around it were really well suited for it.
Yeah, it was actually really funny being online, because they have the permanent like impressionism galleries, and then this was like next to it. So if you walk down the hall, I kept seeing people being like, wait, is this the show? And it's like, no,
it's just what they have.
You got to get on this line.
Yeah, it's like there was a few instances like after I left where I was like, if you went straight, you started bumping into similar, names that I've become very familiar with, like, Child Hassam, John Sargent, Homer's in there.
Yeah.
But then if you were to hang like a right or a left, and you kind of connect back to where like we met in the Van Goghs.
Yeah, if you kind of backtrack,
you're bumping into, like Cezanne and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's like a lot of like it's all kind of in there. But yeah, it was really special.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you got to have that experience.
Yeah. And I because you were saying how you were getting emotional in the portrait gallery. I was getting emotional. Like, it was in like the last room of this exhibition, and I was kind of like, this is so stupid. Why am I getting emotional right now?
It's not stupid.
But I know I talked nicer to myself, but I was like, I was reading the wall label, and it was talking about how because this is all based on like the first Impressionism show that was put on in Paris, and where this art was really like introduced to the public for the first time.
Yeah.
And it was talking about how when that show was put up, people like didn't really care, obviously, but they didn't have an immense hatred for it as you would been led to believe. But the people who hated it were the art critics, and it was the people who wrote about it who like really hated this art. And one of the things they were saying is like, because Impressionism is kind of like, for lack of a better word, it's like pleasure art, where it's showing the city and it's showing people picnicking and it's showing like the beautiful landscape and pastoral scenes. It's all about like kind of enjoying life, or the simple pleasures of life.
Yeah.
And the critics were like, art needs to have meaning, and art needs to have there needs to be an underlying meaning and all this other stuff.
Somebody tell Marcel Duchamp.
Yeah. He would laugh you out of the building. But that's what they had against it. And then the curators of the show were talking about it in this wall label, how like, this kind of arose after there was this huge war in France happening at the time, and it's like people wanted to get back to the pleasures of life and art for art's sake, and how like it doesn't have to have some big meaning. It can just be about the beauty of life, and therefore the beauty of art. And that was making me get emotional, because I fully support that ideology about how like beauty for beauty's sake is completely legitimate, and I love that about that type of art. So I was like, oh, that got to me. And I was like, glowing. Okay, yeah, exactly.
Well, Melissa, I think that's a great place to kind of bookend this conversation. I do have one last question or thought or anything. I feel like we would be remiss, as the resident podcast for the Montclair Art Museum, to not talk about ma'am's connection to some of these institutions. Or not so much these institutions, but a lot of the work that we saw. I have a story to tell you.
Okay.
I had a bit of a jump scare.
Okay.
I told this to Gail. I think this episode is going to come out either maybe before the episode that's coming with Gail, but alas, I think I told this story to Gail in either a previous or future episode. But I was in the Portrait Gallery.
Yeah.
And it was the first time where I got confused because we had exited technically the Portrait Gallery and entered the American Art Museum. And I was kind of thrown off because there weren't any portraits. And I was like, I thought this was the Portrait Gallery.
Where am I?
And Joe and I are about to like turn around and actually leave the space because we're like, this isn't, what are we doing right now? And then as I like kind of glanced around, something caught my eye. A very, very familiar style and brushstroke and haze caught my eye. And I went, is that George Inness? And I like approached it and it was George Inness. It was a George Inness work. And I was floored. I was like, I thought we owned all these.
Yeah, I thought they were all in Montclair.
I thought we owned them all.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. It was gorgeous. It was so beautiful. I don't recall the name of it. I tried to make like a mental note of it at the time my phone was dying, so I could not take any photo. I think I took one photo of the Obama portrait in the Portrait Gallery. So aside from that, I didn't take a photo of it. I really wish I did.
It's so strange because I don't know about you, but I constantly think about him as like a Montclair artist.
Yeah,
like
he's
no one
like,
outside Montclair would care.
Yeah, people
or
like
know.
There's scholars that
But
are like dedicated to his work.
And I'm like, he's a real legit artist, which like obviously he is. Like, and that's just so funny.
I was shocked. I almost spent as much time with George Inness as I did with Ben Franklin in that museum.
And I love that you saw it kind of from afar and you're like, that looks familiar.
Yeah, I
love when that happens at museums. Like when that happens to me, I get so excited where like I kind of recognize something or someone.
Art literacy has definitely gone up since starting working here full time and like doing obviously the show, but just working with the curators and getting to know our collection a little better. Like there are many times where like I don't think I could have told you what a Cezanne work looked like before, but I've flipped through our book of our Cezanne show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I can actually like without knowing a name, I could probably pick out a Cezanne in a lineup or the same with whoever.
That happened to me a few times in the Women's Museum where I was looking through the permanent collection.
With Mikkel and Thomas, I was like,
with Mikkel and Thomas and Faith Ringgold, and like I was like, oh, that looks like something that was in like our Century show or something. And I'd look at the name, I'd be like, oh, I was right.
Yeah, and I would also say the final connection was obviously they're very famous, obviously, and we're blessed to have them on view right now. They will be leaving soon, but I got very excited every time I saw a William Merritt Chase or a John Singer Sargent or any of those casts of characters that are currently on view.
Yeah, and we saw there was a Casale in the Impressionism show. There was
one Casale. Yeah, I was very excited to see that. And there was a Child Hassam that I saw in both the portrait or in the American Art Museum and in the National Gallery. So yeah, and then obviously there was a plethora of John Singer Sargents.
Yeah, just kind of
I know that
around.
our Sargent, the corner of the Church of Saint Cy, from what I understand when I interviewed Terry and his art dealer Robert Simon for our content around that show when it first opened, they had talked about that work displaying at, I believe, the National Gallery. So yeah, it's been in good company, and it's here on view at the Montclair Art Museum. And it's only up for a limited time. It goes down, I think, in February, and yeah, we don't own those works. They're loaned to us. So they will go to wherever they go next. And this is the last chance, really, these final months to see those works here locally. But with that kind of being said, did you have a fun time?
I had a great time. Yeah.
It was really great. I'm eager to go back and experience what I didn't get to go to the East Building of the National Gallery. I'm thrilled to I started going over there and then I realized Joe wasn't there, so I came back. I'm really excited to get over there and see what I missed.
I remembered very quickly how much I love that city. So
well, thank you again, Melissa.
Hopefully
we should go to more art museums together, because that was a lot of fun. I liked this little debrief. But alas, that was Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of this episode. We'll be back in your feed next Wednesday. Otherwise, you can follow us on social media. Our handle is @Mam Montclair. That's MAM Montclair. We're open weekends and Fridays, so Friday counts as the weekend. We're open weekends, so Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You can buy tickets in person or online. Check out us on TikTok and YouTube. You can find us by just searching the Montclair Art Museum. We have a lot of great shows coming up in the new year, so stay tuned to that by checking out our website, just montclairartmuseum.org. That's it. Go visit a new museum. If it's MAM, that's great. If it's not, it doesn't matter. Just go experience museum. Art matters. Museums matter. It's really exciting. Experiencing and enjoying and exposing yourself to the arts matters now more than ever, I think. So, Bye, everyone.
Bye.